Hi, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and this is our 7th lecture in the series of lectures on T.S.Eliot's The Wasteland. And in this lecture, we are going to be discussing the 5th and the last section of the poem, What the Thunder Said. Now, section 5, What the Thunder Said, is the final section and is dramatic in both its imagery and its event. It is significant for several reasons. We have a number of allusions to Christ, to Bible, to the wastelands of Fisher King, and also to the Indian history. Now, Indian wasteland here is described as a lesson to the entire world. And the most significant part in this section is that Eliot is reiterating that we need to find solutions to the barrenness of this wasteland, and he does give an advice of the solution through Indian Orientalism, through Indian mythology, and he takes the reference from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So let's proceed with section 5, What the Thunder Said. I'll be taking up selected lines from the introduction and the conclusion of this section, but I'll try to cover all the thematic concerns mentioned in the section. Now, the opening lines of this section are about the scene of Christ's arrest, trial, and crucifixion. Now, what he means to say here is that modern man has killed Christ by his own indifference and neglect. So he says, after the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over his distant mountains, he who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying, with a little patience. So now here Eliot describes the scene of Christ's arrest. After the torchlight, the men, the soldiers with torches, red on sweaty faces, and after the frosty silence in the gardens, they had come for the arrest of Christ, and then later he was taken for trial and crucifixion. So there was lots of crowd all around, shouting and crying. There was prison, there was palace, there was reverberation, echoing of sounds, there was thunder. But now, once he is crucified, he who was living is now dead. Now, he here stands for Christ, but it also stands for religion. It stands for faith. It stands for spirituality. It stands for soul. So he who was living is now dead. We are spiritually dead. We who were living are now dying. So we as human beings, we as humanity, we were alive then. But now, because of the loss of faith and moral values, we are also dying, but with a little patience. Slowly, we are dying slowly. Then in the next lines, we have a mention to the journey and the hardships faced by Sir Parsifal during his journey to the Chapel Perilous of the kingdom of Fisher King. Now he, Sir Parsifal, along with his followers, move towards the search of the Holy Grail, and they suffer a good deal as they move. There are ghosts and there are demons troubling them on the way. There is a lot of there's dearth of water, there's dearth of food, they suffer from pangs of thirst and hunger, and they have to face lots of hardships and difficulties. But because they are keen on spiritual quest, they do reach their destination. Then again, we have another allusion which refers to the journey of two other disciples of Christ who were proceeding to Emmaus to verify or to find some more information about Christ's rebirth. And one of these two disciples finds that there is a hooded figure who walks beside them. Now this hooded person, which they cannot really touch, is actually Christ, who is helping out his followers in their spiritual quest. But what Eliot tries to indicate here is, it is implied that unfortunately our modern man is not inspired by such spiritual goals. Then in the next line, the poet gives a vivid description of the ravages caused by the First World War. There is massive destruction, civilization seems to be coming to an end, there is death and desolation. Eastern Europe is represented by a beautiful simile of a woman fiddling on her hair. And though every kind of routine is going on in the world around, church is continuing, hymns are continuing, but yet it projects the picture of a modern wasteland, and it is in direct contrast with the successful spiritual journey of the knight who reached the Holy Grail and the chapel perilous. Now here there are indications, there are symbols like the dawn, the light, the rain, which indicate that there is chance of spiritual rebirth. Now coming to the concluding part of this section, where he is referring to the Indian wasteland. Lines 396 to 423 start off with a description of the Indian river Ganga in ancient India, when drought and famine compelled people to pray for divine help. So there was famine all around, again the land was cursed and people were dying of food and hunger and thirst, and they called to the deity, to divinity for help. The supreme deity Prajapati gives instructions in the form of thunder, and these three instructions were in the form of the words da, da, da. In fact, more than words, we can call them sounds. So here da means datta, datta means to give, da means dayadham, dayadham means to sympathize, daya, and da means damyata, means to the self-control. Now this has been taken from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in Sanskrit. So let's read the lines. Ganga was sunken and the limp leaves waited for rain while the black clouds gathered far distant over Himavant. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. Then spoke the thunder, Da, Datta, what have we given? My friend, blood shaking my heart, Da, Dayadham, I have heard the key. Turn in the door once and turn once only. We think of the key, each in his prison. Da, Damyata, the boat responded, gaily to the hand expert with sail and oar. Now here, in these lines, as we've discussed, he's referring to ancient Indian history when this famine took place, and then thunder, Prajapati in the form of thunder, spoke to the people to indicate that this is the way in which you can attain freedom from curse. So here he is kind of, Eliot has universalized this Indian philosophy in the form of a solution to the wasteland. So here in these lines, he has very intelligently and intellectually presented a solution to the wasteland of the entire civilization. Although this passage, this extract also has references to the English literature, the Western literature, yet the base, the grounding of this solution remains the Indian philosophy. Because the first Da means to give. So Eliot asks, what have we to give? Have we given ourselves away? So are we committed to a certain way of life? Just as we ask ourselves today, are we committed to something? Do we have some contribution to make to the society and to the fellow human beings? So similarly, he says, give does not just mean charity, it is giving oneself to a higher discipline, to a more spiritual way of life, or to a higher surrender. Similarly, the next Da, Dayadham. Now here he has a reference, I have heard the key turn in the door. This reference is to Coriolanus. Now he says that firstly we are imprisoned in our own ego cells. We are lying in our own prisons because we are not thinking of the whole community. We are just thinking of our individual prisons. Then he says that each time we put a key, we strengthen the prison. So the more we think about a freedom, the more we are imprisoning ourselves. So now here there is also a mention of the broken Coriolanus. Then there is dayadhvam, means to sympathize. Now sympathize is not just to say sorry for somebody or something. It is an emotional bond between you and the other living beings, between you and the society. But today's man, today's human being has become highly egoistic and selfish, and this has led to the degeneration of all faculties of mankind. I have heard the key, so we've already discussed this. Now, these are the two controlling factors, and the third is damyata. Now, damyata is control. This indicates the necessity for regulating one's life in such a manner that it works for your welfare also, but it works for the welfare of nature also, the other beings who are alive apart from you. So, the poet compares this control to the movement of a boat. He says the boat responded gaily to the hand expert with sail and oar. So a hand who is disciplined, who is an expert with controlling the boat goes very well with that hand. So the heart should also be balanced, responding willingly to the body in controlling mechanism within the individual. So in other words, he says, there is a dire need of today inner discipline and conscience to control our untamed feelings and thoughts. Now coming to the closing lines of this poem, shall I at least set my lands in order? Now here for the first time, Eliot himself as a poet, as an individual, as a human being intrudes in the poem. He says, shall I at least set my lands in order? He says, I don't know about other people, about the other readers of the world, whether they're listening to me or not. But at least shall I initiate this process of discipline in setting my lands in order? London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Then there we have the quotations, and then towards the end he says, why then I'll fit you. Hieronymo's mad again, datta, dayadhvam, damyata, shantihi, shantihi, shantihi. Now in these closing lines, he is trying to strike a personal note as well, and he is wishing for the entire humanity to follow a remedy for the reform of a spiritually decadent society. Now because he has found out 3 remedies which correspond to the 3 das, so he says, at least I want to begin with my own self of setting the lands in order. So the first remedy suggested is self-purification, then there is self-discipline, and then there is detachment. Now there are a number of references in these lines which we can just touch upon briefly. He is referring to Hieronymo in the third last line. Hieronymo is mad again. Now Hieronymo is taken from Thomas Kyd's Spanish tragedy, and this is a kind of a spiritual madness he is talking about, that this madness is the only way of social reconstruction. Only then we will have the blessings of heaven, when we exercise these 3 golden principles of datta, dayadhvam and damyata. So only then we can end with the hope of shantihi. Now shantihi here doesn't just mean peace or a kind of happiness, but shantihi here means that a peace which gives us a proper understanding, so that we no more live in ignorance. So these were the concluding lines of the poem. Now in between we have Latin lines. I'll just briefly quote them. This section concludes with a collage of quotations from various sources. The nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, suggests the demise of London as a centre of a vast empire and a huge trading power. Then we have a line from Dante's Purgatorio. Then we have a Latin line. Then we have a line from Tennyson's poem, O Swallow, Swallow. Then a sonnet by Gerard Nerval. And then finally this Hieronymo allusion has been taken from Thomas Kyd's Elizabethan play, The Spanish Tragedy. And when he ends with a remedy of datta, dayadhvam and damyata, he says that Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi is the ultimate goal that I am looking to. And his Shantihi is roughly equivalent to our phrase, the peace which passeth understanding. And this has been repeated thrice. So this was how beautifully, intellectually, philosophically, Eliot goes about the predicament, the disease, the malady of the present civilization, but also comes round towards the end with a remedy which has been taken from the Indian philosophy. So this was my interpretation of the 5 sections of the Wasteland. In the next lecture, we'll be discussing the thematic concerns scattered through the poem, The Wasteland. Thank you for now.